Welcome back to part 3 of Samuel Taylor Coleridge's The Rime of the Ancient Mariner. Today is a dark and stormy day in quarantine. It's not good to sit down with the sword. Today we will light up a candle to help us with our reading. So, where we left off was the ancient mariner, probably when it was not so ancient, had shot the albatross, the bird of good omen, to the horror of his fellow shipmates. If we review what's happened so far, there are 3 young men going to a wedding ceremony. On the way, an old sailor, an ancient mariner, stoppeth one of the 3, grabs him by the shoulder and says, "There was a ship. The young man wants to do his party, get his little dance and his drink on at the wedding reception. But alas, he is constrained to hear the mariner, for the mariner has some sort of spell over him." The mariner goes into his story and talks about how he'd set sail from what we're guessing is England, down around Cape Horn and up into the Pacific Ocean. On the way, they were trapped in a bunch of titanic killing glaciers. And then the albatross showed up, and a way out of the glaciers also opened up. The mariner and his crew treated the albatross like a pet, feeding it day, and always giving it a hello. After, I believe it was 9 days, the mariner claims that for no good reason, he shot the albatross. One of the more insightful readers of this compared the mariner to the character of Albert Camus' The Stranger, Monsieur Marceau, who said, "You can either shoot or not shoot." You can see at this point the mariner does not necessarily find anything sacred about the albatross or human life, but he is soon taught otherwise, let me find part 3, as everybody looks at the mariner and says, "You've shot the bird of good omen." And then they become stranded out upon the sea when they reach the equator in the Pacific. Where we left off, the crew had taken the albatross and tied it around the neck of the ancient mariner. We also know in the gloss, though the ancient mariner never says it, that they are followed by some avenging nature spirit. So unlike Camus' Marceau, there is some invisible force out there in the world that wants justice for this killing of the albatross. So we left off with the mariner and his crew dying of thirst, with throats unslaked. I will slake my throat now. With dry throats, sitting out upon the sea, waiting for a breeze, waiting for rain, waiting for something to happen to save them. And I'll begin with part 3. There passed a weary time, each throat was parched and glazed each eye. A weary time, how glazed each weary eye. When looking westward, I beheld a something in the sky. According to the gloss, the ancient mariner beholdeth the sign in the element afar off. Now it says the sky, but it seems like he sees it on the sea, so maybe where the sea hits the sky. And he describes it in line 149 as, "At first it seemed a little speck, and then it seemed a mist. It moved and took at last a certain shape I wist." And a handy little footnote says, "Wist is an archaic word for new." Alright, so this thing is moving across the ocean. It moved, let's see, we don't have any sailor talk here yet. He continues to describe the shape. "A speck, a mist, a shape I wist, and still it neared and neared, as if it dodged a water sprite. It plunged and tacked and veered." So this ship seems to be moving across the ocean, and the mariner beholds it as if it dodged a water sprite. And again, your handy footnote says a water sprite is, what does it say down here? Supernatural being that supervises the natural elements. But it could also be talking about our water spout, which is a tornado that happens in the ocean, and it pulls up some water, so you have this spinning spout. Or, like any good poet, he could have meant both. So it's a nature spirit sending this, some sort of, ship out to meet them. Alright, continuing on 157. The mariner describes him and the crew watching this with throats unslaked and black lips baked from dehydration. We could not laugh nor wail, though through drought all utter dumb we stood. I bit my arm, I sucked the blood, and cried, "A sail! A sail!" So it's not very clear if everybody else sees this ship moving about. But the mariner is the one who wants to call everybody's attention and say, this thing out there is a ship. But all of them have their throats unslaked and black lips baked. I guess from sunburned black lips and no water, perhaps. So the ancient mariner, in order to alert everybody's attention, bites into his arm, sucks the blood to slake his throat, and then cries, "A sail! A sail!" According to the gloss, at its nearer approach, referring to the ship, it seemed to him to be a ship, and as a dear ransom, he freeth his speech from the bonds of thirst, a dear ransom by sucking his own blood from his arm. Now with throats unslaked, with black lips baked, agape they heard me call, "Cry mercy!" They for joy did grin, and all at once their breath drew in, as they were drinking all. So these sailors are stuck out on the sea, no wind, no water, slowly dying. And then they see the ship moving towards them, and they all have a flash of joy, thinking, this ship can possibly save us. But now, as you're thinking, in these ancient times, how is this ship moving? There's no motors. Dun dun dun. See, I cried, she tacks no more, or she moves no more. Hither to work us wheel, according to the footnote you have to our benefit. So, the ship stops, and then the mariner says, look, it's not moving towards us. Without a breeze, without a tide, she steadies with a bright keel, and according to the gloss you have, and horror follows as the crew realizes. For can it be a ship that comes onward without wind or tide? So they all realize, what is happening here? Something supernatural seems to be happening. And remember, the crew is having dreams that there's this nature spirit that is following them from where the mariner killed the albatross. It is very important at this point to note that in the gloss of part 2, Coleridge specifically says, after the fog lifted, after the albatross's death, that the whole crew has made themselves guilty also of the murder of the albatross. So even though it was the mariner who began the whole thing, the whole crew is being punished also. And so they're having dreams of this nature spirit, and then they see this ship that seems to be supernaturally moving across the sea. And here you start getting some great images from Coleridge. The western wave was all aflame, the day was well nigh done. Almost upon the western wave rested the broad bright sun, when that strange ship drove suddenly betwixt us and the sun. So you have an image of the sun setting on the horizon, and then the ship moves between the sun and the mariner's ship. Alright, so it should fully block out the sun, or it should block out the sun, and you see a silhouette of the ship. And straight the sun was flecked with bars. Heaven's mercy send us grace. As if through a dungeon grate he peered, with broad and burning face. So for those of you who have ever been thrown in jail, and looked out your jail window through the bars, that is the dungeon grate he's referring to. So as they see this ship silhouette with the sun in the background, they can see its ribs. So the ship is a type of, or sounds like the skeleton ghost of a ship. So only the keel and the ribs that hold the planks on are seen. So the supernatural ship moves between the sun. I'll see if I can make grapes with my fingers. No, it's not working on this camera. Moves between the sun and them, and they can see through the ship. According to the gloss, it says, "It seemeth him but the skeleton of a ship." Alright, line 181. "Alas, thought I, and my heart beat loud, how fast she nears and nears. Are those her sails that glance in the sun like restless gossameres, or filmy cobwebs floating in the air," according to the footnote. So it looks like a skeleton ship with cobweb sails. Oh god, on this dark and stormy day, this might be too much. Line 185. "Yes, growled Pelé, for this is being scared. Or this is becoming frightening. Are those her ribs through which the sun did peers through a grate?" Oh, and now you get a description of the crew on the ship. "And is that woman who's on the ship all her crew? Is that a death? And are there two? Is death that's a woman's mate?" Bit confusing here, so he puts a long gloss. "And its ribs were seen as the bars of the face of the setting sun, the spectre woman and her death mate, and no other on board the skeleton ship." So, the gloss isn't so clear here either, but upon the ship you have something that looks like a vision picture, the Grim Reaper, but not only that, the Grim Reaper brought along his girlfriend. So these two are sailing the skeleton ship. Must slake my throat. Another great image here. The description of Death's mate, or Death's girlfriend, or wife. I don't know how traditions are with Grim Reapers. "Her lips were red, her looks were free, her locks were gold as yellow, her skin was white as leprosy, the nightmare life in death was she, who thicks man's blood with coals." According to the gloss, like vessel, like a ship, the crew is the same. So you have skeleton passengers, Death and his mate, and you also have the skeleton ship. Continuing on, line 195. "The naked hulk, or the ship, came alongside, and there the twain were casting dice. 'The game is won, the game is done, I've won,' quoth she, and whistles thrice." Okay, so it appears as if on this ghost ship, Death and his woman pull alongside, and they're casting dice, or playing a gambling game, and the female of the two says, I've won, and according to the gloss, you have death and life in death. So now she's given a different designation. He is death, she is life and death, which sounds like the maker of zombies. So she has won. They have diced for the ship's crew, and she, the latter, winneth the ancient mariner. Back to the poem. Line 199. "And the sun's rim dips, the stars rush out, at one stride comes the dark, with far-heard whisper, over the sea, off shut the spectre bark." So between the moment that she says, I've won, immediately the sun falls, there is no twilight, immediately gets dark, stars are in the sky, the supernatural game is afoot. Back to line 203. "We listened and looked sideways up, fear at my heart, as at a cup my lifeblood seemed to sip. The stars were dim, and thick the night, the steersman's face by his lamp gleamed white. From the sails the dew did drip, till clomb upon the eastern bar the horned moon, with one bright star within the nether tip." So, it's a description of the night. The mariner says he is, fear is sipping at his blood as if from a cup, and there's a crescent moon that looks like it's smiling, a horned moon. Picture the horns of a bull, and the moon sitting up there at the sky, and inside the little tip there's a star, which according to the footnote is an omen of impending evil. "One after one by the star-dogged moon, too quick for so groan or sigh, each turned his face with a ghastly pang, and cursed me with his eye." So after all these supernatural, very, very scary incidents happen with Death and his mate and this supernatural dice game where she wins the crew, it becomes suddenly dark, and then the whole crew stank-eyes the ancient mariner, and as if to say, what did you do by killing that albatross you're wearing around your neck? 4 times 50 living men, 4 times 50, 200 men on this crew, that's quite the crew. 4 times 50 living men, and I heard nor sigh nor groan. With heavy thump, a lifeless lump, they drop down one by one. So each member of the crew, one by one, thumps down and falls on the deck of the ship, leaving the ancient mariner the only living person on the ship. The souls did from their bodies fly, they fled to bliss or woe, and every soul had passed me by like the whiz of my crossbow. According to the gloss here you have, but life and death begins to work on the ancient mariner. Okay, so the whole crew has died, and then each soul leaves, it says, to bliss or woe. I guess it's an allusion to the Christian idea of heaven or hell. But he hears each soul fly by him, and he characterizes it like the whiz of my crossbow. Or as Coleridge is drawing our mind to the reason this whole thing happened began with a shot from the crossbow, and then when the crew celebrated, yes, 'twas right to say such bird to slay that brought the fog and mist. They all make themselves guilty when they celebrate the death of this albatross. So it seems like the nature spirits working with the ghostly crew who came and had a dice game over the ship. Their deaths come as a punishment for their celebration of the albatross. So you begin to have this this environmentalist theme come out, that if you harm nature, harm comes back to you. And keep in mind, this is all happening, Coleridge specifically mentions the line, this is all happening at the equator. So here we enter this place where the mariner is somewhere between the living and the dead. He's at this, the vocabulary word is liminal states, or this barrier, or this place between this border between two places. The mariner seems to exist between the state of death and the state of life, or between the physical world and the things we see that are talked about in the preface, and the invisible natures of the world that cause the physical world to act. And in part 4, we're going to have our adventures with the ancient mariner and this dead crew before him. I hope you have enjoyed part 3 reading, and you were not too scared, and you did not make urine in your pants. I will see you for part 4 next time. Hush up, boys. I know you're scared of the sword.